Much like how any 4X game is a bunch of menus supported by mathematical equations, a game itself is supported by its documentation. And while I won't show you most of mine, I actually will show you a little bit today, because, there's not a lot. This is a slight fallacy. Like, it's important to have a goal in mind in things you like, right? And especially things you make. After all, it would make no sense whatsoever for me to start making a 4X game and end up making a third-person shooter, right? However, polish and the idea of a release has been on my mind a lot lately. Like, will I release this game? Well, and if people pay for a thing I know isn't likely to be like 2 hours of their life they may not even enjoy, right? However, I don't think I'm special in that, and obviously I don't have the answers. But these are questions I feel like a lot of indies ask themselves for their first, second, or third project, right? It's a classic imposter syndrome question. However, what is imposter syndrome at its core, right? Is it not being afraid? Is it trying to judge yourself too hardly on success, like monetary gain, popularity, or actual quality of the product, right? Is making something people like automatically make it good? Or can someone make a groundbreaking, mind-numbingly amazing game that just doesn't, match everyone else's standards of what a good game is? And I'm not sure, but, of course, it's been in my mind a lot recently. Okay, so that is a bit of a downer, but what I was planning to say was like a political rant against how the internet is costing humanity its soul, but, I think, that's a better angle to start this whole thing on. So this week as a whole has actually been very interesting. It's filled with a lot of everything and nothing, greater understanding of restrictions on what I can do, but also filled with a lot of new paths to which the game itself grow. So, let's go ahead, like I said, let's get started. But first, we gotta review what the goals were for this week, right? We were going to create a color map that the faction could take over, a unit combat, new factions, designing a new UI, decisions for the new UI decisions menu itself, and we were going to accomplish we're going to say that we're accomplishing all of these things. However, reality, only one thing was accomplished, and we'll look at it. However, everything else is, still worth talking about. So, right away, this week, I realized the color map, while it's useful, isn't necessary for what I'm doing, right? If I was making, I was thinking about making a paradox-like grand strategy game, right? And the color map was going to be associated, like clicking on something would be associated with the color map, and that would be a way to map each individual tile. However, I realized that wasn't necessary, right? So I scrapped it. The way it works now is good enough. It's a prototype as it is, and so we just said we just needed it. So the next 2 days I focused specifically on combat, which is now scripted, and I'm going to show you guys in a second. So essentially the way the outcome is that two military units go in the same space, they'll damage one another until one of them runs out of soldiers or morale, and let me show you guys. So at its core, the combat system is not a mono behavior, but it does depend on mono behavior, specifically the army combat, and the army movement. So the way it works at its core is that every combat phase, it needs an attacker and a defender, right? The attacker then is set to attack true, and the defender says it is attack true, and then it goes into a turn, right? So this is what a turn is. Essentially, every turn is a dice roll from 0 to 6, 0 being a crit failure, 6 being a crit success. Essentially, the way it works is you have a massive loss with no penalty to the defender at 0, and then a no penalty to the attack at a crit success. And as you can see here, this whole morale system, we'll get into that later. It's not very complicated right now. The way it works is once morale reaches 0, that unit is routing, it is retreating. And as you can tell, attackers, if they're not winning the dice roll, are taking a morale penalty. Now, the level of that morale penalty depends on the level of their defeat, their failure. So we have here a equation that I'm using for damage calc. So we have to take the absolute value of 10% of the enemy soldiers. They're at 0 specifically. 10% are critting. So their soft power is like I have two different concepts of soft power and hard power. Soft power is strategic. Hard power is just run and gun, like it's just go ham, right? So this soft defense here represents the tactical advantage of the defender. So this D combat stats here. So 10% of the defending force does a cool maneuver, and that does damage based on the difference between the hard power of the attacker and the hard defense of the defender. So if you crit and the defender has really good hard defense, they'll be doing a lot of damage. So yeah, that's that. And then of course we move on to something a little different. We've got our massive. If one is not nearly as bad, they're not doing a massive push against you. They're not flanking you or anything. They're just hitting you real hard, right? So 10% of the enemy soldiers are just critting, right? That's what that D combat stat soldier count divided by 10 is. 10% of the soldiers in the enemy army are critting. And so that 0 is them critting and then them also pulling a maneuver off. This is just them critting. And then they crit and then they hit you for the soft power the difference between powers. Now in this, because they're not doing a cool maneuver, they're also taking damage as well. So in case 1, in our minor crit, they still take damage. And in case 2, which is just a minor win for the defense, they simply do damage and they don't apply difference between hard and soft power. Now if you notice, I did this specific equation to make sure it doesn't get wild. If we only applied hard defense here or hard attack here, we would actually be doing way too much damage. So we did this right here to kind of hopefully tone down the amount of damage. Because you can tell here, a neutral penalty is actually the difference between powers, or the difference between the power and defense, right? And then of course we have the inverse here for the attacker winning. And then of course we have just letting you know when that there's a combat happening. So it basically returns like the hostilities between two factions. And speaking of which, that's going to matter here in army movement. So combat is triggered whenever so the way movement works in this game is that whenever we're moving across the board, we become a child of a new county. That's what the unit does. It becomes a child of a new county. And it looks at all the other children in that county. If any of the children in that county are in the hostile faction, if it looks at its owner and it says, "Hey, owner, who is hostile to us?" And it looks at the other children in that county and says, "Oh, this unit is hostile to us. We gotta fight it. We gotta go at it." And it does this for every other hostile unit in the county, that is a child of that county. And that's basically how it works. And then of course we have our move action and our retreat action. And that's basically it. That's how combat works right now. Next week, I'll be buffing this retreat action to actually do something. Right now, all it does is get the current destination to the retreat location. So essentially, whenever we're moving, and like a unit when it moves to a new location, and whenever it's moving locations, if a location that's it's owned by them, then they retreat to that location. That was the last location that is. So yeah. Cool, that's basically our combat system as it is right now. Eventually, we'll be adding modifiers like weapons and terrain to combat as modifiers. But before we go into factions, I kind of want to talk about recruitment as a whole for a second. Right now, every pop has an aspect called fervor. It shows how dedicated the pop is to the current regime, right? I want that to play a direct role in how pops are recruited. Like, and what type of unit they become. So for factions to recruit units, they have to have a certain amount of fervor, right? So on the county menu, I want to have a bar showing how long it'll be for the next unit to be trained, and a portrait right next to that. The player can select that portrait, and then it'll have a list of all of the units that can be trained there, dependent on the fervor of the pop. And the higher the fervor, the better the units. And how will that be achieved? Well, I'm hoping that we can do it through victories and having abundance of civilian supplies and certain factions decisions, that stuff like that. Alright, now we're going to move on to what I want factions to actually be like. And as you can tell right here, we have a small list of playable factions that I want to have in the game so far. So we've got the independent city of Memphis, we got God's Army, we got Tennessee's Government in Exile, the Anarchist League Tennessee chapter, Mountain Men, and Restore America. So we've got everything from our far right kind of crypto fascists to our far left anarchists, right? If you notice, I don't have communists on here. Well, there's going to be a reason for that. But as you can tell, I've kind of got a whole lore going on, which is kind of necessary when we're setting up factions and what every faction can do and what it can't do, as well as things like decisions and whatnot. And so, like, this whole thing is supposed to represent a larger war that has turned into a proxy war inside the state itself. So we're gonna have non-playable factions, but I'm not gonna have them listed on here. I'm probably gonna list them as I'm talking about them, or in the next scene, or whatever. A little fourth wall break. But essentially, we've got our independent city of Memphis, represented by Shelby County. God's Army, which I'm not quite sure where it's going to be yet, probably in one of the rural counties. We got Tennessee's Government in Exile, which is going to be located likely in Knoxville. The Anarchist League, which is likely going to be located in another more rural county. Or actually, you know what might be good if they're located in somewhere like somewhere in West Tennessee. We'll see about that. As you can tell, I'm not really sure where all of them will be located yet. Independent City of Memphis is the only one that's specifically supposed to be where, like, it's got a lore reason to exist. Mountain Men, who in this case are located in Chattanooga, and Restore America, which is supposedly located. I'm thinking about putting that in another rural county, or in somewhere like. We'll get into that one later too. So, as you can tell, the two I already have places for are this one, and this one. Actually, we're going to switch this up. See, the thing is, right now, this doesn't matter. We'll put the Tennessee's Government in Exile in Murfreesboro. That way, it makes sense for the Anarchist League to take place in Nashville, in Davidson County. That makes a decent amount of sense to me. At least to me, it does. So the way this works, right, is like I said, we have our far right movement, our kind of, hey, we're not actually trying to get Tennessee's government back. We're trying to replace it with our own. Tennessee's Government in Exile is I think of it as our current federal democracy, right? It's like, oh yeah, they still abide by the Tennessee state constitution and whatnot. Where we have Restore America, which is a sect of a growing fascist movement, where we have the Anarchist League chapter, which is a growing anarchist movement. We have Mountain Men, who are more local conservative people just trying to survive in this treacherous environment, and are like, you know what, we want independence. We want to not be involved in any of this crazy crap, which is also what the independent city of Memphis is for. They're also, we don't want to be involved in this crazy crap. This is not our fight. The independent city of Memphis is theoretically, like, in my headcanon, we've got independent black cities who have formed federal alliances with one another, trading alliances with one another, and they're just seeking to just ride this whole thing out. Which is kind of what the Mountain Men are doing. They're just two different sides of the political spectrum trying to accomplish the exact same thing for themselves. Whereas God's Army is a kind of growing movement of radical, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Radical evangelicals who are looking to finally set up a theocracy in the South. That's the whole idea of God's Army. I'm thinking about renaming them to something else. I just couldn't think of anything at the moment, so that's just what they are. There we go. Might call them American Crusade or something. But yeah, that's the factions right now their ideas around them. As you can tell, I've already started thinking of decisions for these as well. Excuse me. And then, of course, we're going to have foreign factions as well, appealing to places like China, or appealing to Russia, or appealing to the Europeans, or appealing to other American factions. Like, I don't want, like, them to be overloaded or broken, but, you know, I want them to be able to ask for help from, if for example, Restore America decides it wants to become a little closer to the center, and they were like, yeah, so we need help to take down the anarchists, so we're going to appeal to the United States, and we're going to ask for aid, we're going to ask for troops, or we're going to ask for money, or something like that, right? But I don't want them to directly come in contact, and I don't want, like, a force you can't defeat entirely to just show up on the map. Don't want that. So these are our playable factions, and these are what are going to show up when we play the game. So the focus the next couple of weeks will be actually to set these factions' desires in the game, and then eventually write out their AI. But of course, nailing down, you know, their themes is good enough for at this very moment, right? The final thing we want to touch, I kind of touched on, that I wanted to finish this week, was a more fitting UI. Obviously, this is the kind of thing that is just going to have to constantly be done. This being a map game, information is going to change, and until I have all the information that I want in the game right now, the UI is going to change, and what it looks like is going to change, how it functions is going to change. So there's no marking off the UI itself. But as of right now, I'm trying to make sure there's as little intrusion as physically possible. So, like, I've pushed all the menus to the left, to the right, made sure that they're as small as they can be, and not bringing up an entirely new page, because right now there's not enough information to fill a whole page, right? If there was enough information that I needed to change scenes, or even, like, block out the game for, then I would do it, but at the moment I don't think that's necessary, right? So I'm also replacing words with symbols to make sure that they're easy to understand. And since the game isn't complex, this is okay, right? There isn't really a need for any of that crazy stuff. And so now, kind of as a conclusion, what am I going to work on next week? We're going to basically be going into... Actually, we don't even need a PowerPoint. It's kind of... What we'll be doing is just defining, redefining, reshaping, and remixing everything we've been doing. All right, I'll be defining diplomacy more. I'll be giving more value to decisions so that we can set the groundwork for the AI. I'll be refining combat, and then we'll be starting recruitment, right? And honestly, that's pretty cool. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you guys wish me some luck. I'll come back next week, hopefully strong and better than ever. Hope you like the new format. Of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Really appreciate all the support. I know the last video didn't get any likes, but it's okay. Didn't get any views either. But again, it's okay. I don't really mind. Peace.